All right, welcome back to another episode of the Christian Sages.
Ooh, that sounded like coronavirus.
I don't know. Maybe I have the coronavirus.
Yeah, you might
I
want
mean,
to
I've
check
been
that out.
exposed to the I've been exposed to the coronavirus quite a few times actually over the last couple weeks due to my job situation. We had two nurses that had it, and then one of the kitchen people had it. So, so far, none of the individuals have gotten it, which is a plus.
If you suffocate yourself, you're safe.
That is true.
I mean, wear a mask and not suffocate yourself.
I'm wearing a mask right now. I mean, suffocating myself.
Yeah, if I sound like this the rest of the day.
Does we sound like Bane from Batman? At least from the movies.
Yeah.
From, the Dark Knight. I actually had one of those like big bubble ones, like real industrial ones that they gave us at work, and I looked like Bane, and you sounded like Bane when you were talking on it. So of course we did Bane a lot during that period where I was wearing it. So today we are talking about, we're going to do our first ever book review, sort of slash social commentary, and we are going to be talking about 1984 by George Orwell. I'm surprised. I didn't realize just how long ago this book actually came out.
Yeah, what's funny is it's called 1984 because at the time it was written, it came out in 1949, but
Yeah.
one of the guys said that he named it 1984, George Orwell did, because he had written it in 1948, but it wasn't published till 1949, so he just switched those numbers around.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. But still, I mean, to him, 1984 would have been a whole nother world. I mean, it would have been...
It was like 2050 to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in his mind, this could be... I mean, and honestly, he got the world... Even I think more of like even more modern today. A lot of the stuff actually we have. I mean, we're sitting here doing a Skype call and recording this on a computer.
And China is watching us.
Unless you talk to... No, it's Russia right now. Get it right. China's too busy dealing with the quote, the...
Oh, no, they're doing the Zoom.
Coronavirus.
Yeah.
So Russia is actually watching us. I mean, you got to get the propaganda right.
Well,
it's Russia. Russia
is not Russia. It's China is not China. I'm doing some double speak there.
That's right. There's some double speak. We're going to believe in the philosophies of INSOC.
Well, most people don't like dystopian novels, but I love them because they kind of explain life a little better, I think.
I'm interested. Like, I never really read this. I don't even think I read it in school, or if I did, I didn't remember it. But this time around, I really enjoyed it. Maybe because I can see just how real the ideas that he was portraying are. Like, they're actually coming to be to some degree. I mean, in his book, the world is separated into three separate kingdoms, if you would, or governments, which are all oligarchies, technically. That's what he's explaining in the book that he gives to... why did it just go out of my head? The main character.
Winston. Smith.
Yeah. Well, he gives it to Winston Smith, the book that is written by the great leader there.
Winston Churchill.
No, that's a great leader. But when Churchill was around then, the guy who was supposedly in charge of and creating this underground brotherhood, and he is the big bad guy that really, honestly, doesn't exist. I mean, when it really comes down to it, he was created by them, and it's a Jewish name, and it just literally just went out of my head. Not Greenberg, but it's something along those lines, Goldberg or something. It just literally went right out of my head. Anyway,
I have no clue what you're talking about.
The one who wrote the book, it's his book, supposedly. But then O'Brien actually admits.
Oh, Goldstein?
Goldstein, that's it.
You're talking about 1984.
Yeah, I know that.
Oh, I thought, okay. I thought you were talking about some real person.
No.
This guy wrote a book. He's Jewish. Oh yeah, that's right. We're doing a podcast
We are.
on
On
1984.
1984. But the book that he gives him explains how the world is set up into three oligarchies that are using war in order to keep everybody in line, really. Because it
Right.
gives people a reason to hate and gives people a reason to get behind you. I mean, if you're always in a state of war, then you can never really look around and see, oh, wait, what's the government doing? Is it really doing this for me? But because it's always for your benefit, it's always for your protection, which on the if you go with the conservative side, that's what the liberals are saying about conservatives, that they're warmongers and they use war to control the people, and they're always creating wars in order to make money off of it and to either profit from it or to control people and to control the narrative. So, oh well, we're always at war with somebody, and they use that to kind of talk about 1984, talking about Bush back in the 2000s, which I don't think that in any way applies to Bush. But I can see where they got this, where they could kind of make the parallels. Whereas you and
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Whereas,
both sides sort of use propaganda, sort of to
absolutely,
get to drive their narrative. If there's always war,
absolutely,
kind of like Goldstein points out, if there's always war, there's always destruction
that's right.
of what people are of supplies. So if supplies decrease, demands increase, and that's how the big guys kind of keep things going.
Absolutely, and then they have this kind of like slave force that's
Right.
in the in between that everybody's kind of fighting over all the time. So it gives it a sense of reality. And then it switches like, oh, he's in Eurasia, so he's in Oceania, and he's either fighting with Eurasia or East Asia, was it? So you're either fighting with one of these two all the time, and then they switch. It's like, oh well, we were always fighting with them. We were never really fighting with the others. But it gives you an understanding when he's reading the book. Now, we're giving this away right off the bat. When he's reading that book that's supposed to be the manifesto of this great leader that's trying to bring down Big Brother, it's really explaining to him that this is an inevitable thing that you can never bring down because this is three governments all working together, three oligarchies all working together to maintain power and to control the people. That this is what was set up, if you would, by the Illuminati. Of course, back then I don't think they were talking about the Illuminati, but that's technically what they are. So it's
Right.
kind of interesting. It definitely gives you a scary idea of this one world government that the modern people are so fond of wanting. This is what a one world government looks like,
Right.
if you would. I mean, oh, well, there's three separate countries, but it's really one world government because the three separate oligarchical reigns are working together to create this world and keep the world where it's at,
Right.
which is one of the reasons why is like you're never going to be able to overthrow us because it's not just Oceania, it's all three of them. It's the whole world. So you would have, and yes, if everybody who's not part of these oligarchical regimes were to rise up, they could overthrow them, which is like in a way what happened in Russia, and it happened in France. This could happen in this world as well, but he doesn't believe the villains don't believe it ever will. So it's kind of
Right.
interesting. I really
Yeah, yeah. He does a great job of showing how slowly and very, very, how slowly things can descend into the sort of this totalitarian super state where they're taking more and more of your humanity pretty much and more your freedoms so that you're controlled by everything. And I think Big Brother, that's one of the things that sort of stands out from the whole novel is Big Brother is people, you get this negative feeling of Big Brother, and that was kind of what he was trying to create, is this sense of he's always watching you.
yeah.
You really don't have any freedom, any privacy.
Even in your thoughts, which as
Right.
the book comes to an end, O'Brien, it's like he's reading his mind. Everything he's about to say, O'Brien knows before he even says it.
Right.
And
Even
it's
Charrington, the guy who he trusted, was part of the thought
absolutely,
police.
absolutely.
So even he was sort of befriending him the whole time in order to turn him in because he was a deviant. And he was deviant because he just wanted to have his own privacy and love relationship with Julie.
Right. Which is interesting. That love is not allowed. That,
Yeah.
procreation is a duty of the state. You do it for the party, but you don't actually love anybody because you're not allowed to love. You're not allowed to feel. The only feelings you're allowed to have is hate. And because it's easier to control you if you're controlled by nothing but hate. Anything they tell you to hate, you will hate. And so therefore you will do whatever they tell you. Even I like how he says, you can't trust your children, you can't trust your wives, you can't trust your husbands, you can't trust your parents, you can't trust your friends because they will all turn you in. Not only if they get caught, but they'll just turn you in because it's always hate. They're always looking for somebody wrong. And you can see the influences on him from Russia because this is after World War II or right around the end of World War II and the rise of Russia. And he sees the totalitarian regimes of Russia and of
he's essentially describing what Russia was like. What you could put it in anywhere in Pol Pot's Cambodia and Mao's China and Hitler's Germany.
He even mentions British socialism was the beginning of this. Yeah. So you can see his idea that this is what he was believing British socialism would eventually become. To some degree, it is becoming that. If you talk to people in Britain, I mean, they're under more control than we are. I mean, their internet is controlled, their television is controlled. Think about it. I mean, their television is state controlled. They don't have, unless they go online, which is also being controlled now over in Europe. Where you can't, Google has special Googles over there because they can't go and just get anything they want because everything is censored by the state. So their news is censored by the state. Their entertainment is censored by the state. Everything they see on the television is censored by the state. It's controlled by the state. They have to pay taxes to pay for their television because it's run by the state. And that is very much this rise of socialism there in that era. He saw this. I mean, even Winston Churchill had talked about this, how this would destroy Britain, the rise of socialism. And you can see that it has. I mean, think about let's say that the British economy is pretty strong. The pound is still pretty strong. But think about it. There's not a whole lot of jobs in Britain. I remember at one point in time looking to go over there just for fun, looking what it would be like to actually move there. Well, there's only certain kinds of jobs. It says right on the website, they said, we don't need any more shopkeepers and bartenders. We need doctors and lawyers and those kinds of people because there's not that many of them coming out of Britain. It's mainly unskilled labor. And because everything is, you don't have to work because you'll be taken care of. It's a socialist state.
It's that's part of what
I'm not trying to slam British people or Britain. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, you should because their country is being overtaken and destroyed. It's been for the past 70 years. Yeah, it's true. The mood of hopelessness really after right around when Orwell died is when it just was going to crap. The mood of hopelessness he builds up about the future of man. He does so in a way that it brings a sobering reality. That's what he's trying to do to the utopian dream that leftists try to create. Yes, and they do so by preaching, have faith in human progress, have faith in human progress. We can create peace and perfect justice. And what's interesting is it's almost like they're trying to destroy. So socialism, Marxism completely set out with replacing God. And what they're trying to do is replace God. What they're saying is, we are the Messiah, hope in the Messiah.
Absolutely.
And that's
he
what
even
they
mentions
want
that in the
to,
book. O'Brien even mentions that at one point.
Yeah.
That they can't. That that God. Do you believe God exists? No. Well, then who's going to save you? Because we are everything. We are the heroes, or we are the villains. We are everything.
Well, yeah. I mean, when it comes to liberalism, I always think of William F. Buckley's quote. He says something like the liberal is someone who, when you're taking a shower, they reach their hand in to adjust the temperature. Yeah. And if you think of living under socialism, like true socialism, and like America right now is very mixed, very much socialistic. We're
becoming
more and more. Yeah. I mean, we haven't been truly just free market free as we think we are for a while, but it's slowly descending on the descent. So you think you like the liberal reaching their hand in to turn the temperature on your shower. Just think about when they start telling you what time you can do it, or what temperature you can do it, or how long you can be in the shower for. That's essentially what Picture 1984 creates. Is you keep giving away these little freedoms for security, and they throw you a little bone,
and then
it gets smaller and smaller,
and you can't get it back without violence. But at this point, you're so far oppressed that violence seems impossible.
It eventually gets to the point where I can't think of the quote, can't remember exactly, but he said, talking about the Nazis, talking about the Jews, they came for the gays, and I didn't stand up because they took them away. They came for he goes through all the minority groups that were kind of taken out in Germany, and then they came for me, and no one was left. You know that quote, but
yes, I remember that quote. I forgot who it was.
And I just completely
it's
slaughtered it.
It's the idea that you look on. Well, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. That's somebody other than me until it's you.
Right. And by the time that they come for you, you're going to be like Winston, where, they're just going to torture me for a long time, and then they take me to room 101, where they either make me sell my soul,
right,
or I'm going to slowly die, and it's not going to matter. The life of Winston doesn't matter, because they're just going to make it vanish from the records, vanish from existence. Which is what they do. They make people that oppose them not exist anymore, which is exactly what Stalin did.
That's exactly what Stalin did in Russia, which is where I think he got this from. You can very much see, because he uses socialism and communism as the basis for his dystopian government. It is not capitalism. Capitalists are the villains that the dystopians are using to say that they are better, because look what the capitalists did. Which, honestly, is what we see now. Oh, look what the capitalists did. Look how bad capitalism is. And we are offering you something better because we are better than the capitalists. But in the end, you never, like you said, you never have enough. There's always a shortage of something, but yet they're telling you that you have more than you used to have. And that was something that, that's something that he was wrestling with, was life really as bad as they're telling us it was under capitalism? And the more he realizes it, the more he realizes it wasn't. It was actually better. But they've told him that it was worse. But then when he tries to talk to the old dude can't remember and he can't understand what he's asking him, because the world has been so twisted by INSOC and doublespeak that they've erased the past. So even people like this old timer, they can't, even if they can remember, they can't remember. You know what I'm saying? And that's right. Kind of the whole point of this. Yes, the history exists, but it doesn't exist. Like O'Brien says, history exists in the past, and the past doesn't exist unless we says it exists, because it exists in your memory or it exists in documentation. So we've erased and changed all the documentation when he's like, well, you can't change my memory. And he's like, you want to bet? And he does. And to the point where he no longer remembers it, or at least he remembers it the way they want him to remember it. Because, like he says, if I even the laws of physics, I can change. And Wilson's like, no, you can't. And he's like, yes, if I want to fly up there, if I say I can fly up here like a soap bubble, then I can fly up here like a soap bubble. And it doesn't matter whether you say I can't or cannot. And then he realizes that if he says it's true, and I'm here, and then I believe it's true, then it becomes true. Even if it's not true, it becomes true to us.
If O'Brien thinks he can float off the floor, and I think he can, or if I think I see it, then it happens.
Then it happens.
So then your perception, your false perception, then becomes your reality.
Your reality, which is what we see in the world today with this idea of my truth and your truth. I have a truth, and you have a truth. And my truth is just as important as your truth. And to me, my truth is real. But there is an actual truth. Right. And that's what he was trying. But yet we're seeing in a world now where that concept of there actually being a truth is changing. pretty soon they'll start saying, well, we want to say that, like he said, if we want to say that the Earth is flat, then the Earth is flat. If we want to say the stars are a million miles away, then the stars are a million miles away. If we want to say the stars are close, then the stars are close. They are whatever we say they are for the moment we need it to be, and the world will believe it, and therefore it is. So that is reality. Reality is whatever is inside of your head, and what's inside of your head is what we're telling you should be inside your head. I mean, it's crazy. And yet that is exactly what, in a lot of ways, they're trying to do to us now, or the world is trying to do. I mean, you can see how a lot of people are taking, I think they're taking stuff right out of the playbook here of 1984. Like, that
exactly.
actually kind of works. Let's talk about this. Well, it's about your perception. Well, if you want to be a female, but you're a male, well, then you're a female. If you want to believe you have no gender, then you have no gender. What?
Well, and that's just it, is when, you and I had talked the other day about how libertarians, I agree with them, and I even considered myself more of a libertarian at times, but there's something wrong with a libertarian, and it's that when you get to the point where all you sow is essentially humanism, like, I believe in freedom, but whatever. If somebody wants to marry a goat, I can't really say anything about it because he's not hurting me. So being a consistent libertarian, you have to say it's okay for him to marry a goat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but when you're a Christian, you have to say, no, God's word must stand. It's the foundation upon which the law comes from. It's the foundation which our country, where Washington said that it's impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible. Yeah. Why is that? Because the state can't be absolute truth. Because when it is, it can say anything to you, and you have to, like O'Brien said, when we control the past, when we control the present, then we control the future as well.
That's right, which they do.
And we can say 2 + 2 is 5, and what are you going to say? Because unless you're appealing to God, who alone is absolute truth, then you have to appeal to us.
Which is what he says in the book, which I thought was fascinating. And he asked him, do you believe in God? And he's like, no. Well, then there is no other higher power than us. So who are you going to appeal to? If there is a God, then appeal to God, and he'll come and he'll save you. If not, then there is only us. Which it's in a lot of ways. Even the parallels. I know he uses. Some people can parallel this to, religion is controlling, and religion is, religion says that there's an absolute truth, and then you can't know anything but their truth. And people have used that to say that religion are very dystopian. And that's not what he's saying here, because religion has become bad and always does under socialism. Religion cannot exist because if it goes against the state, it cannot be there. The state is God, not God. So religion can't really exist because it will always compete with the state for power. And that's kind of what you see here. There can't be religion, which is why they've taken all the churches and they've renamed them and turned them into other things. And when he's trying to remember the names of all these churches and that little song, which even that ends up being controlled by the party.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is, I think everybody has used Orwell to prove their point about different stuff at times. I mean, both from the left and from the right. And my response to that's another thing that they have completely twisted, is that fascism is the far right wing, and I completely reject that.
No.
The whole thing with that being right wing is National Socialism. That's what Nazism is.
Right.
It's National Socialism. So it's got more of a nationalistic bent, whereas communism has more of a worldwide, global goal.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's government control, it's government power over, and that's what everything right wing stands against.
Right. So that's the absolute extreme right wing is actually libertarianism. So, which is no government. You would have to say an anarchist would actually be an extreme right wing.
Right. If you were to draw like a grid, I would definitely be on the right. Libertarians would be over there. They'd be like sort of to the right bottom, like all the way in the corner. And I'd be probably more in the middle of.
And so would I, because being a conservative Christian. Well, thinking about anarchist would be extreme right, because no government, and I mean, I guess you can kind of make a statement like an anarchist is There's no government. There's only what I want to do. So that's technically extreme right. But you could also say that's extreme left as well. But what we see in extreme left always tends to be the government for the people.
Right.
That,
Think of it this way, Jay. Okay, left wing reached the hand into somebody else's shower to adjust the temperature.
Yeah.
Extreme right wing at all is don't put your hand in somebody else's shower.
Or I'm going to cut it off or shoot it off or. I mean, I guess.
Yeah,
I
I'm going to think you're either have bad intentions if you're doing that, or you're just sick. You're just a little.
I really think fascism is the far left. I don't think it's far right, because because every socialist society that goes bad becomes fascist. It's that simple.
Well, and the thing is with 1984, part of what it's warning us against is it's sort of like Lord of the Rings, like I mentioned earlier. We the ring of power. When Gandalf and Elrond are talking about at the council, they're talking about in the Fellowship of the Ring, they're talking about even in our hands, we would try and use it for good.
Yes.
But even the ring, even us, it was not made for us.
Right.
We are not supposed to wield this power, and it will eventually turn corrupt.
It will. It will eventually corrupt us. Absolutely.
And that is exactly
we will place ourselves as a new Dark Lord on his throne. That's what Gandalf says, and even Galadriel says the same thing. You would replace the Dark Lord and put me on his throne, and I would be terrible and lovely. But in the end, she would still be evil because she would become just like him, a Dark Lord on a dark throne. And O'Brien makes that comment here when he asks him, why does the party exist? And he says, because people can't rule themselves and you know better than us. And he says, no, we exist because we want power. That's why we exist. We want power.
It's all about understanding who you are. Yeah. Man, who are you? And it begins with something, even for people who are good. That's why we always talk about in Christianity, we can't say, well, we're really good. Our hearts, when you start trusting your hearts, you need to understand you're going to drift. You're going to stray. That's why you have to constantly give your heart over to God.
Absolutely.
It begins because even in government, it begins with something very innocent. Yeah. Like I would use this power to punish evil, to ensure justice, to fix these problems in the society. But then it goes too far.
Darth Vader and Star Wars. It might be a
precedent set by like a natural disaster or some threat
or
where you give up your freedom just to feel safe. And
or
that's
a disease
what happens
like
with
COVID-19.
Even good men in government is that even good men can be drunk with power. It can overtake them.
Well, that's the point. Darth Vader is another perfect example of this in literature. In movies. Anakin Skywalker starts out with a desire to save Padme. That is why he turns to the dark side. And then as he's going, well, I can use this power to overthrow the Emperor. But then what his very next line eventually comes to, so that we will then rule the galaxy. Because it is always about power. Once power becomes your goal, no matter how good the intention, it will then twist you, which is what O'Brien says about all oligarchs and tyrannical people, governments, is what he says. He's like, it always you can say it starts with something to that, I want to help the people and I want to better the people, but in the end it becomes tyrannical and always becomes about gaining power and keeping power. That's what it becomes. That's what it will always become. That's why Washington was such an amazing leader. He was given absolute power and he turned it down.
Exactly.
Because he knew what absolute power would do to him. If he gained absolute power, he would never have given it up. And the people of the United States would have been fine with that. But it would have set a precedent for future presidents that they would refuse to give up their power. And
that's where when you talk about the Enlightenment, a lot of people argue the Enlightenment was what founding fathers were all about. To an extent, sure, but it was primarily founded upon Christian morality.
It was.
And here's the thing, is that when you think you can figure it all out, this is what the Enlightenment did. Here comes the French Revolution. Here comes Marxism. Here comes communalism and the godless Bolsheviks, non-Christian Trotsky and the anti-Christian Lenins. that's when they all come in
Yeah.
and kill more people and destroy more people. And oh, by the way, when has socialism, communism ever alleviated poverty or done anything
It
that
hasn't.
people still say that it's going to do today?
And it's
But
not.
you see, when God is taken out, what happens? Whereas in the American Revolution, Edmund Burke wrote a great essay on that comparison contrast of the American and the French Revolution, where he shows really where America was undergirded by law and morality, and it was Christian morality
It
that
was.
undergirded the whole thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But
No, absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And you can't take that away, but you try. And there is no time in all of history, recorded history, where socialism has ever bettered the lives of the people. Because socialism is a return to fiefdom. It is a return to being ruled.
yeah,
That's what socialism is. And this whole idea that they're going to make it work differently, it just isn't. In the end, what it produces is not class equality, but a greater an extreme separation of the classes, because you have a ruling class and then you have a subjugated class, and that is what you will always have. And the ruling class will tell the subjugated class what they can and cannot be, what they can and cannot have. And if you have a good ruler, then you might have plenty and you might have better things. And if you have a bad ruler, like you've seen most often in Russia, you will have nothing, and the party will have everything. And that's what you're seeing in 1984, which is why I really believe it's a very good parallel to Russia, which is what I think he was trying to do, was make a parallel to Stalin and Russia. But that is the reality. But that is what people want to go back to. And to say that our founding fathers would want this is ridiculous, because they fought against this idea, and they came out over here to produce a place of freedom where we can be free. Freedom of religion was not that there would be no religious involvement in the state, but that the state would not be involved in religion, because they wanted the freedom to worship God the way they wanted to worship God, and not have a king or a government tell them how they have to worship. Not that their religious philosophies would have no place in a government. That is a twisted thing that has come since the 1960s, because people rejected the morality of Christianity because they wanted to live however they wanted to live. And so then they've twisted the words of the founding fathers to mean that, because it's easier for them to say, well, then the church has no place in politics. But the church has every place in politics. Politics has no place in the church. There's a difference. The government has no place in the church, but the church has every bit of a right to be involved in politics, because they're they're the people that govern us. So if my philosophy is that I'm a Christian, then I have every right to vote and to try to have laws passed that work with my morality. That's the reality of my government. But you have no right to come into my church and tell me how I can and cannot, worship. And that goes for any form of religion, even Islam, as long as we're not breaking the laws. But see, that's what you see in 1984. That's what you saw in Russia. That's what you see in Germany, and is what you'll begin to see, and have begun to see a bit in the United States, is laws being passed that make it impossible for us to follow as Christians. I cannot follow this law, and so therefore there's going to be a consequence. You know what I'm saying? And and you see that in 1984.
And it's sad when you can't reject, for example, baking a cake for a gay wedding, or you'll lose your job and be considered a bigot. And that's where the government has gone too far.
Absolutely.
And has become very
1984. Absolutely. That should never have been brought before the government. That is hate crime, which is very similar to thought crime. You think a certain way, and so therefore you are a criminal. That's exactly what thought crime is in 1984. So let's get, because we are talking about 1984. We'll get back to that in a minute. So the novel was published in June 8th, 1949, by Secker and Warburg. It's his 9th novel. It is pretty much a story about a totalitarian government where there are 3 separate super governments, which are all 3 of them are oligarchies: Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. And they have separated the world into these three different segments, and then there's a little piece in the middle where there's a group of people that are pretty much considered workers or slaves, and they are constantly fighting over this ground. And it's designed that way. And so the more that you win in that ground, the more slaves you have, and then vice versa. Then they come in and they take more ground, they take away your slaves for a period of time, and it's controlled by these totalitarian governments that are, this one takes place in Oceania, which is run by the party, which obviously, and they're called comrades, which is where you can see the Russian influence. And Winston Smith, who is the main protagonist, he's just an everyman guy, and he works in kind of like a middle management job, rewriting history for the party. And he
loves to scratch an itch on his ankle every day. That's his most pleasurable thing. So think about whatever is pleasurable to you, watching your favorite show, or, going out to dinner with friends, or whatever it might be.
But you can't do that here.
His is scratching an itch on his ankle.
Right, because all entertainment is run by the party.
Yeah.
Very similar to Great Britain. Anyway, so he is having interesting thoughts, and he buys this journal from this old guy who remembers the olden days and Ampleforth, and he has this little antique shop over in the proles area, and the proles are like the slavery. They're like the lowest level of human being. They're not even considered humans, really. They're considered more like animals, and they're like the low class people, and he's kind of middle class. And so he's over there, and he's in this, for some reason, because he can't get out of his head that he remembers things from the past that the party is saying don't exist. And he sees this picture while he's rewriting history that comes through of these three people that were erased from their thought criminals. Now, in this world, when you are found guilty of thought crime, your existence is erased. You never existed. It's not that they just kill you. They erase you from all of history in the present and the future. You never existed. You don't exist now, and you never will exist. And anybody who says you exist is crazy and a liar, because you never existed. So he finds this picture of these three guys who were supposedly had committed these crimes, and then after confessing these crimes, they were kind of brought back into the real world to say they'd committed these crimes, and then they disappeared again. And he sees this picture that shows them like being like they were inner members of the party. They were like mainstream, like high up party members, and so they didn't actually do this. And it's his proof that they didn't do this. But then he immediately destroys it because he doesn't want anybody to know that he saw it or that he's been thinking these thoughts. Because the thoughts is that the party is lying, and he knows the party's lying because it's his job to rewrite history. And so anytime history changes, he has to go back through all these other documents and rewrite those documents. So the paper that said, this happened in 1942, well, now we've changed history, so you have to go back and rewrite those papers or books. And then those new issues will come out, and all the old issues will be destroyed. Which would be nowadays, they're going to destroy your old files and only new files. So you would read a blog, and then tomorrow you'd go up and the blog would be changed and be rewritten, and the old blog wouldn't exist and you wouldn't be able to find it, which actually kind of happens nowadays. So He goes out and he buys this little glass paperweight, but it reminds him of the past. And he's trying to remember his mother, and he's trying to remember his sister, and he's trying to remember his father, and all of these people that no longer exist and have been erased from history to some degree. And he's trying to remember what life was like before all of this, before the Great War, before the nuclear explosions and the war between all of these things, when the world was different. And he's, for some reason, has this nagging feeling that this is all wrong, and that the world was better, and that this is just the party is evil and it's controlling their future. So he ends up kind of getting a journal and start journaling, but you're not supposed to do that because that's a thought crime. You are only supposed to journal and only supposed to say what the party tells you. So if the party says that 2 + 2 = 5, then 2 + 2 = 5. You shouldn't have in your head that it equals 4. And you shouldn't be writing it down, any kind of thoughts against the party. That's thought crime. So he starts journaling about how he's feeling, and then this girl all of a sudden starts following him. And in this world, the women, there should be no sex drive. There's what's called the anti-sex league. They'll have sex with you, but only to procreate, not because of anything, because sex is bad and it's nasty, and it's only there for procreation. It's not there for joy or to be intimate with somebody, because that's not possible. You're not supposed to do that, and it makes you a pervert if you enjoy sex. So, he hates women because of this. Because, you're supposed to enjoy it, and I can't enjoy it. And he knows he's supposed to enjoy it, and he knows it's supposed to be more than what it is. But so he hates women because they're always around tempting you, but yet you never allowing you to have them. So he thinks this girl that's following him, this pretty girl, and she's quite a bit younger than him, because I think he's like in his 40s, or he's like 40, and she's like
39.
He's 39, and she's like 20 something. And so 26 was it?
Yeah.
And so she's following him. And she passes him a note one day saying that she loves him. And he's like, what? He can't believe it. He thinks it's the thought police. But then he can't help himself because she's beautiful. He ends up meeting her and then realizes that, she's been, she wants to have sex and she enjoys sex and doesn't care about the party. And so they start hooking up at this together, and she knows of all these secret places they can go, but you can't go more than once in like a month or 2 months or whatever it is. So he finds this place, Alberforth's place there. Over it is this room, and there's this big picture in the room, and this is where he and his wife supposedly lived. And they decide they're going to start meeting there and having an affair, and this is going to be their secret hideaway. And so they end up having lots of sex, and they're enjoying their life together, but they can only do it periodically. And as they do this, at first it's more like a sexual thing with him in particular, and then it becomes love, where they really love each other. And it's more than just sex. And he's married, but his wife left. So he hasn't seen his wife in like years. So he's technically married, but yet really he's divorced because his wife left. And they weren't having sex anyway, and she didn't like him. It was just because the party told him they had to get married so they could have children and procreate. So he has this guy, O'Brien, who is a higher-up party member, who for some reason when he sees him, he thinks this guy understands me, and he's probably hates the party just like I do and sees the things I do. And then he has a dream about him where in the dream he says, I'll meet you in the place where there is no darkness. So he thinks that it's like this sign that this guy is a good guy. And he ends up coming up to him and is like, I seen what you do, and I see that you're using, are you using the new dictionary of Newspeak instead of the old one? He's like, no, I'm using the old one. He's like, all right, well, come to my place and I'll give you the new one. So he decides to take a chance with his girlfriend to go to him because they think he must be part of this brotherhood, which is this underground organization that's trying to overthrow the party. So they go to his house, and he ends up saying, yes, I am. He shuts off his telescreen. Now, everywhere you go, there's television screens, but they can see you and hear you just like you can see them. So you only see what they want you to see, but they can see and hear you all the time. So there's no freedom. They even worry that if they're out in the wilderness that there are cameras out there or listening devices out there, which it ends up being that there really are everywhere. And so he shuts it off. He's like, you can shut it off. He's like, yes, because I'm a higher party member, I can shut it off for a half an hour before they start wondering. Which also leads you to understand that the party can do whatever they want. So these high party members, they can do whatever they want. They are beyond the rules where you have to follow the rules. They're the ones who enforce the rules. They are not bound by the rules. And that's kind of interesting as you go. You see this, that's more and more. So he tells them, you're now going to join the Brotherhood, but you will never know anybody in the Brotherhood other than these three people. We're going to probably change your face, change your name, possibly. But for right now, you're just going to go back. And then he asks them to do are you willing to do all these horrible things for the Brotherhood? Are you willing to kill children and throw acid in children's faces and, murder women and children and bomb things and send out sexually transmitted diseases and do all these horrible things and lie and steal and cheat? And the only one thing that he was not willing to do, or Julia were not willing to admit that they would do for the Brotherhood, is leave each other. And he's like, okay, So we'll be in touch with you. We'll give you this book, which is Goldstein's book, and you will understand then what the Brotherhood is about. So a couple
So I
months
take
later,
it from that they're Democrats.
yes, pretty much. So a couple months later, somebody mysteriously gives him the book. He's reading the book, sleeping with Julia, and the book just explains how this came to be, how these oligarchical people created these three governments, and the world is actually engineered, that war is constantly used in order to keep the people in a constant state of anger, hatred, and a feeling that the government is there for their protection. So they're always in a state of fury and worked up. Oh, I can't believe they did this, and I hate them. So we need to fight against them. We need to do all these things. And then on top of that, I love the big brother because he's trying to save me. And so they help you see that it's not just Oceana; it's all three of them. And so he, while in the middle of this big hate, which they call, what is it like? It's like
2-minute hate.
It's 2-minute hates every day, but this is hate week. If I remember correctly. Yeah. They're in hate week where it's like this whole week-long thing. But in the middle of it, while they're screaming about how they hate Eurasia and how Eurasia's done all these horrible things, all of a sudden the person changes and starts yelling about how he hates East Asia and how Eurasia is our ally, and everybody screams like, that's just the way it is. We've always been at war with East Asia, even though 5 minutes ago we were at war with Eurasia. But Winston's like, what? He gets it. Like, wait a minute. So he goes back and he's, with Julia and they're in Ampleforth, Ampleforth little place there. And all of a sudden, he falls asleep, reading the book. He's reading it to Julia, and he didn't learn anything new. He thought he would have this big epiphany and it would explain all about the Brotherhood. And there's nothing new. It's just an explanation of how the world is working. All these things that he already knows. And, all of a sudden, he gets up and he and Julie are looking out the window and they're just holding each other, and the window, the picture, picture begins to talk to them and tells them to stand still. And then he realizes that all along, this whole place has been one big setup. That behind the mirror, they pull down the picture and there is the telescreen, and the people are coming to get them. And that they're never probably going to see each other ever again, and they're both going to die. And then the guy comes in when they're being arrested, and it's Wilberforce, this guy that they thought, this old dude that they thought was trying to help them. No, it was Charrington. You're right, it was Charrington. Sorry, it was Charrington. And he's an officer of the thought police, but he's also Ampleforth, isn't he? Because they're saying that he's Ampleforth. Charlton.
Yeah.
Charrington is Ampleforth. So this
I think you said Wilbur somebody.
I'm sorry, Ample. Yeah. I said Wilberforce, but I meant Ampleforth. So Ampleforth, this old gentleman that supposedly lost his wife and remembers the olden days and hates the party, is actually the head of the thought police, Charrington. And this has been one elaborate sting that they've been setting up for like 7 years, that they've been watching these two. Or at least they've been watching him for 7 years. And so they beat her up, take him away, and then they start their re-education process of him, where they beat him and torture him, and till eventually he finds out that O'Brien is actually kind of the head of all of this. He's actually really the head of the thought police, and he's the head of the re-education project. And he, they've kind of always knew this internally, is what he says. And he goes about re-educating Smith, and because it's not good enough for them just to kill you and make you a martyr, or even just to erase you. They want to change your thinking so that you actually agree with them. Then they'll kill you.
Right.
Which
you must not simply obey, you must love him.
You must love him. So he goes through this whole elaborate process where eventually he does become re-educated, except for one thing: he will never betray Julia, who they're saying betrayed him like right off the bat. Even though that was a lie, you find out later to some degree. And so they eventually bring him to the room 101 after years. He finally gets reintegrated. He's kind of about ready to go back into his life or to die. And he's saying in his head, when I die, I'm going to allow these thoughts to come back to my mind, and they won't be able to control it. And the moment the bullet is ripping through my head, I will hate Big Brother. And then they come in and they're like, he's like he could read his mind. He knows what he's thinking because he had just yelled out, "Oh, I love you, Julia," in his sleep. And so he realizes, now I'm going to have to go through this all over again. And they bring him into room 101, which is where your worst fear is. and in his is rats. And they strap him to a chair. They put this apparatus on his head with these rats in him, and they said, we're gonna, you either have to learn to love, make me believe you actually love Big Brother, or we're gonna let these rats, which is his biggest fear, onto you, and they're gonna eat your face away until you're dead. And so he starts screaming, no, do it to Julia. Do it to Julia, not to me. I don't care what you do to her. Right. Just don't do this to me. And that's when he realizes he's betrayed her, and therefore he no longer loves himself or her, and he's completely broken. And that's when they realize that they have completely got him. And so they let him back out into civilization. He ends up seeing Julia later on, and she's just as broken as he is. And they both admit that they betrayed each other, but that at the moment of their betrayal, they meant it. So they no longer love each other either, because how can you love somebody that you are willing to allow these horrible things to happen to? And that you would not really give up yourself for the other person. They're completely broken, and they've completely bought into Big Brother, and he goes back to his little place there, drinking his crappy gin, and it makes it, now the version I had made it seem like they shot him in the head at the end, because he says the bullet finally came while he was drinking, and they were talking about how we had won while he's playing chess with himself. And so I don't know if that was a symbol of the bullet finally came, in the sense that he as an individual, his will, his freedom internally has finally died. And that's what the bullet was that he's talking about, I think. I don't think it was an actual bullet. I think it was that he internally has finally died, and he is completely given over to Big Brother. So, because they don't want to really kill you. They want you to become one of them, technically. So anyway,
okay, yeah. So he was walking down the white-tiled corridor with the feeling of walking in sunlight. The long-hoped-for bullet was entering his brain.
Right. So it made it seem like they shot him at the end, but he was sitting in the. When he's saying this, he's also simultaneously he's sitting in.
Right. He gazed up at the enormous space. 40 years. Taken him to learn. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother.
Right, and I think that's what, because he's sitting looking up at the telescreen in the bar at this point. So I think the bullet that they're talking about is more a philosophical one, that internally he has, like what he wanted. He's saying, you brought yourself to this point because you will not exert the will to believe what we want you to believe. If you would just simply really do it, then you could change your thinking to believe what we want you to believe. And I think that's what that represents, is that it finally happened. The bullet went through his brain, in the sense that he no longer exists. He is simply part of the collective. He is part of Big Brother.
Right, yeah.
I think so. Because he's talking about how he's walking down the White Hall, but he's sitting at a desk, or he's sitting at a table. So, either they shot him at the end, or it's a philosophical being shot. Anyway, I think he leaves that open on purpose. I kind of saw it as a philosophical being shot, like he is finally dead to himself. He is no longer a man, as he would say, because they don't claim to be men. They're not men.
The only thing he had going was his hatred for Big Brother.
Right.
Even betraying Julia, if he could have still hated Big Brother, then that would have been
enough.
His. Which I think, when you think about where did Orwell get it right? He got a lot of things right, but I really think he got some things wrong too. For example, his whole idea that all the hope lies with the proles. Right. That's one thing.
The lower class.
And we could talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
But the thing is, he also leaves no solution outside of, for example, why would you reject the absurdity of it all? Right. What's the ultimate purpose? What is the object? Is there absolute truth, or is it just Winston wants to be happy and say 2 + 2 is 4?
Right.
And what I think he's getting at is he wants him to be happy just saying 2 + 2 is 4. If he can just be left alone and believe in truth and rationality, and it's sort of a human reason, sort of glorifying human reason, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of what he's getting at, and I disagree with him, because I would still say, well, what's the point then? what's the point to just what's the difference in the proles being they're happy. He even says that in the book at times.
Right.
He's like, well, they're happy, but they're essentially slaves, but
they're beyond the party. They don't
right.
care.
They're not being controlled. Right.
Because they are, but they have like he says when he's in prison, the thought criminals, the political criminals are treated differently. The regular criminals, the murderers and the liars and the drunkards, they don't care.
Right.
They don't care what the party says. They're like, whatever. But it's these guys, because he's technically party. He's just a low level party, so,
right.
But it's a controlling of people, and the proles are already controlled.
Like for me though, is that I like that he got across what he's trying to get across. We already talked about it, the mood of hopelessness about the future of man, making that a sobering reality to hey, these leftist utopians coming in with their dreams, they're going to actually crush you.
Absolutely,
they're going to crush you guys because you're never going to have this perfection. What you need is what he wanted was more of a democratic government where people are not controlled by a small amount of people who don't really care about them, who all they want is power. So he's warning against that.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's something that is that really where your hope is? Because if you're hoping in the proles, which is why
it's this hope that this lower class is going to rise up and overthrow them, which he even uses like, oh, it's happened in the past, it'll happen to you. And he's like, but yet here we are. If it's happened in the past, how come we continue to rise to power? What gives you this idea that you will ever overthrow us?
And it comes to, it's kind of like, this is Neil Postman. Remember earlier we were talking about Brave New World and doing that maybe a little later, but I came across this right before we got on tonight. But listen to this. He contrasts Orwell with Huxley in Brave New World, and it's really, really great.
Yeah.
He said, what Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Yeah. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with something equivalent of Feelies. I don't even know what that is. The orgy-porgy and the centrifugal bumble puppy. I have no clue what I just read. As Huxley remarked, the Brave New World revisited the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny, failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, Huxley added, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. Yeah. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we would love would ruin us. And I think there's a balance, though, between the two.
There absolutely is. Which is
with
why
84, with 1984, there is a very real concern we should have against Big Brother, against government control.
Absolutely.
But there's also, what does freedom do? We look at our society now. What does freedom do? We don't even care. People like history. We talk about history.
Absolute freedom. No government is anarchy. There's a movie, Natural Born Killers, where that's the concept is that all morality is just a creation of man or governments, and so true freedom is being beyond all of that. But the end result of that is these people that just go around murdering and killing and torturing because that's what they want to do. And who tells them that that's wrong? If they want to do it and it makes them happy, why is it wrong? And that's the end goal of absolute pleasure, where you do whatever makes you feel good, you should be able to do. That's wrong. So we say, well, you can whatever you want to. Liberals say, well, you can do whatever you want to do, whatever makes you feel good, be whatever you want to be, as long as it doesn't necessarily hurt somebody else. Jay here. Due to the length of this episode, we have split up our book review of 1984 into 2 parts. Part 2 is coming up next, so stay tuned and enjoy. Also, as always, if you like the content that we're creating, please smash that like button and subscribe. It really helps us out. We appreciate it. We love you guys, and God bless.